Hi, I thought I would just catch a cuppa with some of my friends from down under, wearing my New Zealand hat, as you can see, which I picked up in February. And so here's to you. My friend Kevin Henke just left the office. Kevin was one of our speakers at at a conference here in Minneapolis. I think it was 2 years ago. He's a great Hebrew scholar and works well. He works as a chaplain actually. Great guy. Anyway, Kevin cleaned me out of my Roman series. He got 14 copies of each of the Roman books for a Bible study that he is part of over in Wisconsin, and he cleaned me out of the church history books too that I had. So I'm going to have to get more of those printed. Anyway, that's all good news. um, Interesting, today's news, which I mentioned in a weblog just a little earlier. I wanted just to mention it in this video as well. Trump has hired on a new attorney as of yesterday, and his name is Emmet Flood. Very interesting that his name, Emmet, means truth in Hebrew. And so this is a truth flood that is coming to government or to the White House. I'm not sure quite how this is going to take place as far as a level is concerned, but it is very interesting that there is a flood of truth coming. And of course, yesterday, May 2nd, 2018, was the 17th day of the second month on the Hebrew calendar. And in my previous video, I mentioned how this day was also the beginning of the flood in Genesis, is it Genesis 7:11? The flood came on the 17th day of the second month. And so we were alerted to this earlier and have been expecting to see some sort of manifestation or some kind of a sign that the flood was beginning. And so obviously then we get Emmet Flood into the White House team to defend President Trump. Now, the interesting part of this is that we had some people had questioned whether or not the 17th day of the second month was May 2nd or May 3rd. And some were saying that it was actually May 3rd rather than May 2nd. And of course, in my last video, I said that, we'll have to see, because events should really prove this out one way or the other. Well, I believe that the events have now proven it out because Emmet Flood did not get hired today, May 3rd. He got hired yesterday, May 2nd. And so the timing of this, I think, proves everything out. So this is very interesting. But now, of course, what are the implications of this? That the flood obviously is a reference to Noah's flood, and in Matthew 24, we have the statement that Jesus made about in the days of Noah, and everybody was living life normally until the flood came and took them all away. And so we've always wondered, what does that mean? And there's many layers on that, of course. There's many ways to look at it. But as far as the flood itself is concerned, it appears that we are now beginning the pattern, as of yesterday, for Noah's flood. And it's interesting that it would happen right here during our time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread for the second Passover during this week from April 30 to May 6. And so because of this, we're looking at a flood type as well. I mean, it's a Battle of Jericho type, at least for these first 7 days. But after this, what about the flood? This has added a whole new dimension to our watch dates here. And so, first of all, we know from Scripture that the flood, or the rain itself that led to the flood, that caused the flood, was 40 days and 40 nights. And so that will take us to June 10. If May 2nd is day 1, then day 40 is June 10. So this is our first watch date period here, and we'll have to see what happens as far as that goes. But then there is a longer period of time because the flood actually lasted on the earth 150 days. I presume that the 150 days begins with the beginning of the flood, i.e. May 2nd, rather than June 10. I mean, it's not 150 days after the rain stopped. I think that it's 150 days total. Well, the 150 days then ends on September 28th this year, which happens to be the 5th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. The 5th day. Well, what is the significance of the 5th day of Tabernacles? Well, it's the middle of the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you recall the signs in John, the 8 signs in John correlate with the 8 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's on the 5th day of Tabernacles where Christ returns. Now, I'm not expecting Christ to return per se in the middle of this Tabernacles, although if he does, I will certainly be there to welcome him. But these things have a way of being fulfilled on lower levels or lesser levels before the big one occurs. But then, who knows? This is 2018. You know, Babylon is falling in this year. And so this, I think, is going to be a very significant time. And I think that the Feast of Tabernacles this year is probably going to be extremely important. And right now, our focus is zeroed in on the 5th day of Tabernacles, September 28. We will see what will happen. It correlates with the 5th sign in John, which is where Jesus walked on the water. He came to the disciples. Peter went out to meet him. He escorted him back to the boat, and suddenly they were at the other side of the lake. There in Capernaum, the covering of the Comforter. And so with all of this happening, it's amazing how the hiring of Emmet Flood as one of Trump's personal attorneys can have such an impact on the timing and understanding of what is going on today and this summer, this week, for the next 40 days and for the next 150 days insofar as what we are to watch for. So I'm rather excited about it. Now, we've just started this time period, of course, and so I don't really know what is going to happen. Basically, all we know right now are the biblical patterns. So if you know the biblical stories, then whatever happens, you'll be able to understand what happens because the biblical story will give you the explanation of what is happening in the real world today. And that's the way it always has been. That's why we look at the types and shadows and the signs of the times. It's not about following signs. It's about understanding what the signs mean. And we can't understand them, of course, unless we know the Bible stories. And so that's why we need to study the scriptures to understand what is actually going on. Anyway, that's about all that I have to say in that regard, other than to say that my wife, Darla, has flown down to Dallas. I took her to the airport yesterday morning, early, and she is going to be babysitting a couple of grandchildren while our daughter is out of town at a business convention. And meanwhile, also, I will be leaving on Sunday on a trip. I'll be heading south as well. I'm going to visit with the Weavers, and we're going to, talk shop and planning for the future. But more than that, I'll be going down to visit with Robbie Yates down in North Mississippi for a couple of days, and then the following weekend on Saturday, I'll be driving to Arkansas, where a couple of our grandchildren will be graduating from high school, and that's where I'll meet up with Darla, because Darla will be driven. Our daughter will drive her to Arkansas, and I'll be coming in from Mississippi, and so that's where we will meet again. And then we'll be heading on home from there. So we'll be gone maybe, I don't know, 10 or 12 days, beginning this weekend, and should be back, I think, about the 13th or 14th of the month, something like that. And so anyway, I just thought I would let you know, because during that time I won't be able to really feasibly do any weblogs, and but at least I finished up 2 Corinthians 5 today, and who knows, I might get into it. I still have a few more days. What is today? Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Okay, I still got 2 more days to do some weblogs in 2 Corinthians before I leave on this little trip down south. I forgot to say one thing here, and so I want to add this to this last video. The end of the 150 days of the flood, which began May 2nd, yesterday, comes to September 28. September 28 is very interesting because it's not only the 5th day of Tabernacles this year, which marks the point prophetically of Christ's return, I might add, but also September 28 in the evening was actually when Jesus was born in 2 BC. So it marks also essentially the date of Jesus' birth. September 28 to 29 is when we would celebrate Jesus' birth, on our calendar anyway. Back in 2 BC, of course, it was the Feast of Trumpets, which shifts every year. But this year Trumpets is a couple of weeks earlier. But nonetheless, if you're looking for a fixed date on our calendar, it would be, we normally think in terms of September 29, but I believe that it's actually the night of the 28th, which of course in Hebrew time was the beginning of the 29th. Well, so here we have, look at the overlays of prophecy happening here. Noah comes out of the ark on the 28th of September, according to this pattern. Jesus is born, according to this pattern, at the same time, and the return of Christ in the 5th day of Tabernacles also. So we have some major convergence here of prophecy according to various patterns that are happening, and it's all happening here in 2018, which, as we know, is the beginning of the actual fall and collapse of Mystery Babylon. Their time is up. So this whole pattern here, first of all, the Jericho battles, but also then the Noah's flood thing, which we're going to watch for in the next few months. These things are very significant, and it provides us with something to really be watchful for and orient our thinking toward throughout this summer. So I just wanted to add that to this short video because I frankly forgot to do that earlier. Okay, God bless.